Welcome to the webinar on digital universities in India from the Indian Express and upGrad. The Union Government in the National Education Policy has set an ambitious target to achieve 50% gross enrollment ratio in higher education by 2030 to equip its working population with employable skills. However, will physical universities truly be enough to reach this goal? Today, with rising internet penetration and the need for availability, accessibility, affordability of quality higher education in India, digital universities are a real possibility. To make this vision of digital universities a reality, what is the support needed at the policy level? What are the building blocks of a digital university? Can it match the education quality of traditional brick and mortar universities? So to discuss this, we have here today an eminent panel with Mayank Kumar, co-founder and MD of India's largest online higher education company, upGrad, Professor M.B. Rajiv Gowda, a former Indian Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and ex-professor of IIM Bangalore, where he also headed the Center for Public Policy and currently serves as chairman of the Congress Research Department. Along with Professor Jagdish Sheth, a global thinker, Padma Bhushan awardee, and a Charles H. Kelstad Professor of Business in the Guizetta Business School at Emory University, US. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's start by talking about the role of technology-driven capacity in higher education. How will this help us scale infrastructure to meet gross enrollment ratio or GER goals? So, Professor Sheth, would you like to take that?
No, it's just a remarkable thing to see how much the cell phone revolution in India, as it is true in China and many other emerging economies, has transformed not only the economy, but the culture, education, healthcare, everything. It's a remarkable change if you think back only 1991 economic reforms, or if you go back to the independence days, this is mind-boggling change. And to me, that change has already happened. What we thought things will happen in education through physical real estate, building complexes for teaching, libraries, residential halls, is now getting more and more digital. And I think the journey has begun, but it is a journey that's going to continue, probably no return. So what was peripheral? We looked down on distance education, as we used to call correspondence schools at one time, satellite-based education. Today will become, what is peripheral will become main, core, and what is core will become peripheral, essentially. And to me, National Education Policy document articulates very, very well the use of digital technology or remote learning in some fashion to reach as many people as possible. And ultimately, the mission of a nation, the purpose of a nation is to unlock the potential of its citizens. So I'll take a little analog and then connect back to again to the digital technology. If you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, an agricultural commodity, the value add is only 3 or 4 times. If you take a rough diamond, an industrial commodity, which is nature gives us, the value add is about 15 times. A good diamond cutter will polish it. But if you take a human being, mentor, educate, especially polish, the value add is infinite. And that's the business, that's the mission of a nation. And I think companies like upGrad can enable that vision mission by going as much as possible for distance learning or remote learning or digital learning. I think it's very, very possible. And to me, that will transform the nation, not just primarily the people, but the whole country.
Professor Gowda, would you like to add to that?
Well, actually, for years, we've been talking about our population, our young population, as a potential demographic source of a demographic dividend. Earlier, we used to say our population is our burden, and then we had this paradigm shift. But in the last decade or so, we've not been able to put in place the kind of infrastructure that would enable our youth to, to really tap their potential. And now, with this possibility, with technology being able to reach more and more people and bring them into the education net, then this very inspiring vision that Professor Jagdish Sheth just shared with us, the value add for each human being is infinite, right? That can become a possibility What used to be a problem can now become a very, very transformed India. And why just India? We could become,
Yeah.
the hub for transforming the possibilities for billions of others around the world. That's the kind of potential that exists in technology, in virtual and digital universities. And I'm looking forward to engaging in much more of an in-depth discussion that will give us a sense of what it would take to and it's really very exciting to be involved
Right.
with the action at this very crucial revolutionary cusp, and to be part of hopefully a dramatic new future that gives large numbers of people an opportunity to engage with the best of education.
Mr. Kumar, would you like to weigh in here?
No, no, sure. Thanks, Anuradha, for having us here. I think Professor Shane and Professor Gowda have covered the key aspects of it. When we started upGrad, Anuradha, our thought process was beyond quality. Access was a very, very critical thing. And I always used to ask people when they join us that, look, for every one of you, there are 3 people in your similar age group who haven't had access to college education.
Right.
So all of us come from extremely privileged background, and in India, the current gross enrollment ratio is 25 to 30% in that range. So for every one of us who are on the panel today, we have 12 outside or 30 or 16 outside who haven't had access to college education. And in India, Anuradha, today we have, give or take, about 30 million students in higher education. And to the introductory note that you mentioned, that number should ideally get to about 50 to 60 million enrollments if we have to hit the 50% GER ratio. And if we hit that GER ratio, that means that we need incrementally about 30 million additional seats. And the pure sheer cost of infrastructure, rather, for setting up one seat in India is close to about 10,000 US dollars. That's immediately a $300 billion plus investment. And that kind of investment in a country like India is a challenge, and therefore online has to take a leapfrogging as similar to what mobile phones did at the time of landline phones also. And the second thing which I always talk to, we all have had access to high quality education. I personally am a product of highly subsidized education system in India.
Right.
One of the things that always bothered me was we had campuses which were built at 300, 400, 500 acres, which are pretty large. And we're graduating about 5,000 to 10,000 students every year. And I think the place where we are in India, we do not need those numbers, but we need graduates at millions and millions coming out. And can high quality education come in, provide access, and therefore transform the way education is delivered, such that 5 years later, Anuradha, we talk about online education the same way as we talk about mobile phones today, and not how we used to talk about landline phones earlier.
I think India can easily aspire as the education capital for the world. We have the talent, we have the capacity, we have the content, we have the experts, and especially for other emerging economies. So to me, that's very exciting. And the only way you can do it is, given all of the populism movements, given the visa restrictions, work restrictions, is pretty much an online university, online education. And I tell you, if we can do IT services so well in about 25, 30 years, $150 billion industry, and all of the top Silicon Valleys have to come to India now because workers are not allowed to go there, or the cost of visa is very high. So all of them are investing massively in India. In Bangalore, Hyderabad is one of the high-tech cities again. I think one can do the same thing for education. And the new or national education policy allows to create a cluster, not only just for India serving market, but the global market at the same time. So the excitement is not just with advanced countries alone, but I think on the education side, other emerging economies is a great proposition for both win-win situation between India and those nations.
Mayank, as you said, you talked about access to education being a privilege, for Indians. So when we're talking about access, in smaller cities, towns, villages of India, so this is where digital universities can play a large role, I think. So are we looking at a future where, we have large teaching universities which are totally digital? Do you think that's a real possibility? Ma'am, would you like to take
No,
that?
no. I think I strongly believe, Anuradha, that many of the universities are trying to put their feet on both sides of the line, i.e., a university's responsibility is to create knowledge and to create workforce. And sometimes research and teaching have to be delineated and given the right importance. And I think with Professor Sheth said and about the new education policy and the new government push on online degrees, a lot of universities, at least the top 100 and the high quality universities, are allowed to offer online degrees. And come to think of it, a lot of what happens in smaller cities and smaller towns is that those individuals and those students travel to a bigger city to either join a Mumbai University or a Delhi University or a Calcutta University, etc. They study in these universities, take up a very low rent, 3,000, 4,000 rupees a month kind of accommodation, prepare for the UPSC and government examination, and thus try to make the ends meet by being out of the small towns, which in many cases you do see the male audience or the sons of the houses to travel to sort of those bigger cities,
Mm,
but the daughters get left behind. And with
mm,
online
mm.
degrees and online education, can you bring the leading universities, a JNU to a smaller town, a Delhi University to a smaller town, a Mumbai University to a smaller town, such that they get access to those high quality education, A, and B, it also allows not just the access to the higher education, but it also cuts out the entire sort of cost of travel, the cost of settling down in a new
Yes.
city. And slowly what we are seeing is that after studying there, they also come back to their hometowns to take up a job or to take up something in the nearby towns and cities, because not everyone wants to stay away from their hometowns.
Yeah.
If that can happen, new pockets of
Correct.
economic development can come up in smaller towns and smaller cities
Correct.
also. It's a long-term journey, but I'm sure that the right steps have been taken, and the top universities coming online will definitely help in spreading the human capital, not being concentrated to just the larger cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the language challenges, and a digital
Yeah.
university can offer multilingual possibilities.
Exactly. So true.
Yeah,
But I think the language challenges, Anuradha, what you raised is a very key point, because people still are multilingual in many places.
yeah,
English is a very small fraction. I mean, India alone, now you can have with technology simultaneously somebody who is learning on Hindi platform, while we can teach in English platform. It's all possible. Technology is incredible. I mean, Zoom we are doing right now. Who would have thought about Zoom maybe 2 years ago? Today we are very comfortable. Most of our meetings are by Zoom now. Think about that paradigm shift. And education is no longer a terminal degree anymore. The half-life of knowledge is getting so short. It is 18 months and declining in software, for example. In management, we think it's also 18 months. What I start teaching in MBA in the first year is obsolete, half of the knowledge. By the time I'm through in 2 years, with digital university, you make a student a lifelong learner. It's nice to have a degree, correct, and have an employment, but that doesn't mean you stop learning online, which only digital can offer part-time. While you are working, you can also have access to some courses. You have another degree from bachelor to master's. It just goes on. I'm sorry to take a longer time, but I'm so passionate about this thing. I thought I may as well pour my heart out here, not just my mind, okay?
no, no, definitely. It's you're making fascinating points. And yes, you're right. Like the pandemic has just accelerated, the online boom, if we may call it.
Yeah,
And I think earlier, if universities felt they had a choice of whether to, go online
yeah,
later, go online partly. But now I think speed is of the essence. There's no option really. You have the time is now. Like
right, right, right.
so can we look at a future where we have again, we're talking about large teaching universities, completely virtual digital university, which is at par with a physical university. So for a student, when they're making that choice, it's the same whether it's a physical or a virtual university. It's at par. Professor Gowda, would you like to take that?
Yeah.
So I've had the privilege of going to some of the world's best universities, and what I think the challenge for the virtual environment is it's not about just bringing the teaching or giving access to students
Mm.
to best professors. That is certainly one part of the function of a university, and that is something that the digital world is primed to do. So that's the the first major step. Take the best knowledge, best teachers, and share that with students. So that is doable right now, and upgrad is already at the cutting edge of all that. But what else does a university give you? What is the immersion, the engagement with others, the learning from peers, the cheering at the sports events, all the university spirit, the Friday nights at the wherever the local hangout is. There's so much to life on campus, to listening to talks by eminent visitors. There's a lot of other things, and that's really the challenge before facing those of us who are, like Mayank, trying to create the best possible learning environment. We're trying to create these virtual universities to also build in all those other dimensions that we took for granted and that we thoroughly enjoyed, that immersion in campus life, as we call it. So how do you recreate that in an online environment? How do you make sure that people can still have networks and possibly some online, offline kind of engagement? There are all those challenges, all those angles that, if you could add them to this mix, along with inclusion, along with gender equality in terms of access, along with the ability to go beyond what is available in your neighborhood to actually partaking of the world's best teachers and their offerings, what else can you put together? And in those other dimensions lie the basis of creativity, of being able to gain the confidence that you'll be able to engage with different people in different settings. There's so much else that comes in. So how do you recreate that? How do you balance the offline and the online, if at all that needs to be done? That's the real challenge to take this vision to its proper conclusion, if at all.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, the upside is that, a student in Mumbai or Ambala has access to a professor in Massachusetts. That's absolutely correct. But yes, like you said, there's a concern that, what about real time, experience in workplace situations and in corporate scenarios? How does that work? So Mayank.
Yes, absolutely. Making content accessible is not the job of online universities. I think getting content accessible is just part one of the problem statement. Part two is how do you recreate the experience? How do you bring the alumni experience? How do you bring peer-to-peer? I always jokingly say that great content in a great technology platform is just a glorified content library. But none of us went to a university for the library it had. We went for the full experience, and that's where having the faculty members, the peer-to-peer engagement, talking to the industry experts, getting the industry coaches onto the platform. How do I bring the human touch in an online environment is the critical part of it, Anuradha. And therefore, on that concern that you mentioned, that how do you bring in real experience? Look, I mean, I always say to Professor Gaurav's point that, look, how do you create that experience online? When was the last time you spoke to your best friend? Most likely it was on WhatsApp, most likely it was a FaceTime, most likely it was a Zoom call. And that's where the world is evolving towards. And a lot of things that we do on campus can be replicated. For meeting in person, yes, perhaps once in a month, once in a quarter, you can have a small meetup in Bangalore, in Delhi, in Ambala, in Kolkata, where people can come together just to see face-to-face each other and form that personal bonding. But a lot of other human element like teaching associates, TA office hours, making sure that you have an industry connect, making sure that you get to meet the industry coaches to come and counsel you. We can create an entire Uberized model to what Professor Jagdish had said, that how do I build India into a soft power? We have so many experienced and qualified professionals and faculty members that can plug into this digital online universities. And if someone has a query, real-time clarification can happen. If someone has a doubt, someone can respond at 3 a.m. at post midnight to that particular query. And those are the ways in which, as edtech platforms like us at upGrad, we are trying to solve for. On a very sort of lighter note, there have been instances where a couple has joined us. not married pre the start of the program, and post the completion of the program, they did get married. So sometimes
Mhm.
that social bonding does happen on online platform also, but
Oh,
those
yeah.
are that's not the objective of the online education platform, but it does end up happening that you do form closer bonds.
Yeah. All the dating, Mayank, is online now, actually, okay? They don't read matrimonial
Yes,
columns
that's
in
true.
newspapers anymore, okay? They go to shadi.com or bharatmatrimony.com, etc. All young people do it. But I do want to add something that Mayank and Rajiv talked about. If you take and I think Rajiv made a key point, what do we do on the university campuses? We do three things: teaching, but we do research. And research is becoming much more mandatory, almost significant in the Indian university context as it is in the rest of the world. And the third one is campus life, as Raji mentioned. I think this next thing, upgrad type, all digital universities can do is to also organize research collaborations between faculty members. Much easier today than ever before. So today, people are crossing boundaries of not only institutions within a country, but between countries. Most of the publications are now joint publications in all disciplines, but in management, which is where we think a little more. So I think one can put all of research agenda, which we do physically, on online today. That is where the universities will be motivated to go online, because research is a very key component, not just teaching. And at the graduate level, especially in many disciplines, research and teaching come together like a doctoral program. It's all about research to create more scholars. So it's very possible, not only at the undergraduate level, but at the PhD and the MBA or master's level. Now, the last element is the experience. I think one can do very interestingly. We do have lots of safaris. We have tourism. There's a medical tourism. In this case, the cohorts, which are global cohorts, would love to meet with each other on a physical space someplace. It's possible that different campuses can host them as a group. Fulbright fellows come, Humphreys fellows, we get it at Emory University. Fulbright is a great model because there are hundreds of visitors from all over the world, and they visit different campuses, stay on campuses, 1 month, 1 week, whatever it turns out to be. I think we can add on to say that those who join a digital university ecosystem, the faculty, the students can easily visit, maybe on some schedule. I think Rajiv is right that we will need some physical experience. It's like class reunion, in many ways. I think about that one. After 50 years, you want to go back and meet each other, something like that, in person, enjoy for a couple of days. That also is very possible today. Most students do go abroad for 1 week immersion or one semester. We are now encouraging, especially in the Indian universities, to have a faculty abroad program where faculty immersion takes place in other cultures and countries, in the way they teach, in the way they do research, and that they learn quite a lot. So I think one can use a digital university as a platform to host the events in the process. It can be done physically. So all three things come out. Ultimately, still, I do agree with Rajiv. People will have to accept this. Legitimacy can only acquire through research success of digital universities, and still may not be the same as living on the campus, smelling that food, for example, going outside the campus and eating some street food, etc. Those kinds of experiences would be harder to duplicate.
One of the things that I see wearing my policymaker hat, right? As a
Right.
former member of parliament, I used to be on the HRD committee of parliament, etc. One of the challenges is, who is going to do this? Who should be allowed to do this? How do you
Mm,
ensure quality? How do you keep, the
right.
promise of this, what we are talking about, which is so exciting? How do we ensure that that promise is realized without
Right.
somebody, experiments going awry, without somebody trying to make a quick buck? That's really the challenge. And can the policy making environment really keep up with this, right? A lot of times in India, the policy making environment, whether the UGC, University Grants Commission, or whatever other policies, have tended to be extremely conservative. Okay. But as Mayank was pointing out, already now, under the new because the national education policy also talks about moving online, there is a possibility that more and more courses can be offered online. And what is the quality control? Who should be able to do this? Is it only something restricted to existing players, or do you open it up to newer, newer companies, for example, in the private sector? And how do you make sure that these companies, bring in the best of what the private sector and the market is supposed to bring, which is innovation, quality, all those sorts of technology, investments in those sorts of cutting edge things, because they always want to be one step ahead of their competitors, right? At the same time, what does this do to the bottom line for access? Is it going to lower costs? After all, once the content is created, if it is shared over larger numbers of students, the cost per student can normally drop. So the real challenge for the regulatory environment is to actually think about who all should be tried out. And here I want to talk about one phrase that has become fairly common, even in India. It's called a regulatory sandbox. Okay, basically the idea is, yes, of course, we have all kinds of traditional rules and regulations and restrictions, but in some domains, let's carefully create an opportunity for experiments, for newer players to come in and prove themselves, rather than wait for them for 20 years before they can actually succeed. So this is, I think, the kind of attitude that we need. We need to make sure that quality is maintained, that the players who are getting in are not fly-by-night operators, but we also can't just stick to the existing players. We need to be able to open up to private sector visionaries and to see whether they can bring the magic of the market in a manner that does not exclude people, but ensures that very, very high quality education becomes accessible to much larger numbers. Education, of course, the research mindset, and the ability to be able to do various things. That's really, I think, where we are right now, trying to figure this part out.
Today, technology will allow me to do mass customization. I can teach a class of 1,000 students or 5,000 students and break them into virtual teams where hundreds of my colleagues, assistants can actually make them experience, which looks like that in a small class. Mass customization, mass personalization, we know how to do it even in manufacturing, let alone digital technology. I did teaching like that last semester. First time I taught online, I broke my class into 5 virtual groups and I posed questions to them. We had speakers who came in. We created live consulting. I could do a lot more on the online platform that I never realized the potential if I changed my thinking about how to teach. And this is where universities will have a challenge.
What we are also underestimating, while there is capital expenditure required for building physical brick and mortar infrastructure, there's an equal amount of investment required to take these learning experiences online, whether it is on content development, building the right capabilities. Today, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, we offered our online platform to about 1,000 plus institutions. 80% plus faculty members, in fact, the number was around close to 87, 88, had never tried any form of online teaching. So that capability building, the ability for faculty members to come and deliver online. And I always jokingly say that faculty members are great theater artists. They can perform in front of large audiences because they seek validation. But to move them from theater artists to becoming movie stars does require a fair amount of sort of transition in that journey. And I think that's one place where Professor Sheth said that it does require good collaboration with an ecosystem that knows it, with the ecosystem that has a subject matter expertise, and together can you recreate the experience in the online world. And that's a very interesting point of how do we create it while bringing the faculty member and then bringing the human touch. To Professor Sheth, that look, large audiences coming and learning from Professor Sheth, and then they have 15 teaching associates who are giving personalized attention to those learners. All those are possible, but it does require rethinking and reimagining of what digital university will look like.
There's this apprehension that a student may be treated like a customer. Like you have a Netflix-like subscription where you come and you earn credits and you go off, so in that case, yes, like all of you pointed out, one has to balance things in such a way that there's research, there's interaction, there's uh, exciting, group activities, community building happening, and at the same time, there's a focus on quality. And so, as Professor Gowda was talking about privatization, so maybe you would like to add to that on, what infrastructural support do you think private institutions could require from the government, to basically spearhead this education revolution? What do you think in terms of building requirements, infrastructural requirements, promoting greenfield digital universities? Professor Gowda, would you like to take that?
Well, see, one of the challenges, and rather for a long time, has been the concept of digital divides, right? And
Yes.
even 20 years ago, we would talk about some of the major digital divides that were facing India. One was, access to computers. The technology itself was not accessible. Now, with the
Right.
smartphone in more and more people's hands, still only half the populations, maybe, that particular divide has been bridged. But the other two, one is the language of the digital world is still mainly English, and in
Mm.
India, the vast majority of people are not English first language speakers, and they find it a challenge to keep up. And so, how can you overcome that
Yeah.
challenge? And it could be partly like what Professor Sheth was talking about: real-time translation. All those possibilities exist right now. So those are two major digital divides. And I suppose, what would be the role of government? Maybe to create more and more, like co-working spaces, co-studying spaces with the technology built in, such that not or even mobile vehicles that can go from one village to another, and essentially provide access to those who are excluded, right? And and those who can't even afford a smartphone, and of course, internet and bandwidth and all those are the other challenges, which even in the Zoom environment that we're engaging in, we're always concerned about, oh, is my network sufficiently stable and strong, right? So those sorts of digital divides are we are beginning to overcome them in a very significant way. So the role of the government is to create that infrastructure that makes those digital divides history. So it might mean having a competition for more technologies that can do real-time translation, finding ways of taking the platform, and making it accessible to more youngsters everywhere, or even older people coming back to learn, and and of course, making sure that essentially that nobody is excluded. And that's really, the equity side of what the government can do. And there's a certain amount of infrastructure involved. And the other side is a lot of Indian institutions, probably a third to a half are in the public sector still. And as
Yeah.
Mike was pointing out, if you go to some of the well-established institutions, they have a lot of space. So how can you parlay that space in every district headquarter, in every smaller town, in the government colleges, when actual classes are not being held? Can you use that for some other purpose? Can you build in the infrastructure that will allow people to congregate and take part in online? That's sort of a bit of a blended learning model. There's so many things where a government can play an active role. So I think, again, we're only limited by our imagination. By once we understand the reality of who's in and who's not and why, then the role of government is to bridge, that gap.
Today, our government can invest capital. They already started the National Science Foundation or National Research Foundation. I think we can do quite a lot if it is in the common good for the nation, and let the private enterprise benefit from that, or government institutions like education, hospitals can benefit. To me, that's the responsibility of the government is very key. And of course, not only building those, but maintaining them over time, upgrading. This industry will require as much capital investment to start as a digital university as maintenance cost. Maintenance costs are about the same as capital cost, because technology is moving so fast. You have to obsolete, everything is obsolete. You have to upgrade constantly. As we say, software upgrades that we get all the alerts, but also hardware upgrade at the same time. But I think that's the role of the government to say, how can I create a multiplier through public infrastructure, which is paid by the taxpayers, which is paid by some other, maybe grants from other countries? How will you do it?
Mayank, would you like to add to this on how the government can support private enterprise?
No, I think there are multiple ways that, I mean, what Professor Shane and Professor Gora said covers most of it. But outside of that, I think what you have seen recently, Anuradha, is that AICT, which is part of the government sort of regulatory entity, has encouraged a lot of edtech companies. They initially brought on board after selecting 500 edtech companies to come to about 14 to partner with the government. Now they've taken the number of edtech companies to about 50 plus. While government has their own online platform, they are also encouraging some other private platforms to come on board. So I think the role of the government should be, as everyone mentioned, how do they create the environment where the best of all the worlds can come together with the right oversight, with the right sort of making sure that the quality gets maintained. And if that thing happens, I think, there are enough, as Professor Shade said, that there's enough innovation happening in the country. It just needs the right channel where all of that can merge together. Unique program, unique content, unique learning experience, backed by very strong technology. And that's where we can take high quality education to scale. And if those are the areas that government can focus on, I think I'm sure that taking the gross enrollment ratio from the current 25-30% to 50% is going to be a much easier journey than what we are anticipating at this point in time.
Finally, what do you think are the kind of policy level interventions that are required in this space? And like you all have said, that this is an opportunity for India to showcase something for the world. So how can policy support this? Professor Gowda, would you like to start?
Well, first by creating these regulatory sandboxes, an opportunity for different groups and companies and nonprofits also to come in and experiment at the cutting edge. That's certainly one area. The other, just like what Professor Sheikh mentioned, the National Science Foundation, the National Research Foundation model, which essentially says, we as a government are not the repository of all knowledge. We will open up, we will have competitions for innovation you lay out this problem and say, we want to take digital universities, virtual universities, and make them a reality. And we're going to set aside, 5 crores, 50 crores for different proposals that will be funded, that will explore and try and figure out what to do. And in the process, when a group of peer reviewers look at proposals, come up with, choose the ones which have the best promise, and then give the entrepreneurs, the social entrepreneurs, a chance to actually go out there and take that idea to reality. This is how innovation gets done. It doesn't have to be top down and dictated by government. It can be something that you tap into the creativity of the crowd. Okay, and that's you have to do it in a particular way.
So my own view, and again, very, very much complementary to what Rajiv says, is that government has to make education as a strong value add of one of its best resources, which is human beings. And taking an economic lens on that, not just a cultural or a social lens or a citizenship lens. And suddenly saying, my God, this is such a strategic asset we have for the nation, like any other strategic asset. What can we do to protect it, of course, but what can we do to increase its value? We do that with mission orientation. It says, I give a challenge to myself. Like Kennedy talked about, a very famous, I will have a man on the moon by this time. We have a Mars program from India. We are doing very well in the whole Defense Research Agency, for example. They're quite good. If we make a mission on education, to say by this time, we will be ranked among the world as the education capital of the world.
There's a very strong push by the government on promoting online degrees and online education. That push, I think, needs to translate to on-the-ground action by various universities. While government has opened up that online degrees, universities need to train their faculty, train their ecosystem to build that infrastructure to actually take it and demonstrate that online degrees can go live and people are benefiting. Because unless that action happens, it's just going to be at the policy level. So I think the push by the universities to actually take it to the last mile is going to be an integral part of the designing of the policy and the push by the government. I think the second critical thing, Anuradha and I always go back to the example of financial literacy and online lifelong learning ecosystem, because everyone spoke about lifelong learning. We do need to, as a country, promote a very strong culture of lifelong learning. I think we have been trained that life has got 4 phases, and after the age of 23, 24, 25, you're not supposed to study. But in today's world, lifelong learning is going to stay relevant. Government has done multiple tax initiatives that if you put this much in mutual fund, this much in the equity market, you will get some benefits. I think the same way we do need some policies to promote continuous investment in your own education, so that there is a incentive by every professional to invest in themselves, grow. I know it just sounds very this thing that, look, why should they not invest in themselves rather than government promoting? But some of these things does require that strong push by the government infrastructure to make that happen. And the last 2 points, Anuradha, from my side would be that as we speak today, world's largest education company is from India. And there's enough innovation happening in the Indian edtech ecosystem, and the private companies are coming and showing strong traction. There's a strong opportunity for edtech ecosystem as well as the university and the institution ecosystem to come together and see how they can collaborate. And that sense of collaboration needs to come in. And finally, as government, the focus should be no fly-by-night operator, very high push on quality. And if these things work out, I think we'll have a very unique and very interesting online university ecosystem in this country, which is the need of the hour. And if done right, can solve for multiple problems for the next 5 to 10 years for India.
Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar. And I think we've discussed it. Digital universities, the time is now. So I think we've built a good case for this. Yeah. Thank you so much.